Oh, they can't. Good evening and welcome to Glasgow, where over the past 2 weeks, world leaders and their negotiators have been trying to thrash out a deal to try and limit global temperature rises and to stop the consequences of failing to do so. There have been commitments from the UK government and from governments around the world, plus from businesses as well. But how much difference will it all make? We've been getting your questions on what all the work here in Glasgow really means for our own lives, our planet and our future. And tonight we'll put those questions to our guests. And they are Bernice Lee, who is a Research Director for Futures at the UK think tank Chatham House and a member of the UK Climate Change Committee. And on the day that negotiations have focused on cities and regions, we're joined by Andy Street, the West Midlands Mayor and a Conservative. And thank you both for joining us. And if you have any questions during the programme, well then you can leave a comment on this video if you're watching on Facebook, and if you're watching on our website, well then send me a tweet. All of the details on your screen now. Bernice, let's come to you first. You've been here 2 weeks. It's probably felt like a very long 2 weeks, but give us a sense of how well you think this conference is going.
I mean, look, we have all arrived here after a really hard year. A year of pandemics, really extreme climate impacts, also really increasingly bad-looking geopolitics around the world. So on the back of that, we have had a first week, as many have described, of sugar rushes, where there were lots of feel-good announcements of different deals that are being done among countries and others. So now we're in the final stretch. We are now, the end is in sight. At the same time, the end is still, we're rushing towards it. But at the same time, we are seeing some of the thornier pathways in order to get to the end point where we have a good outcome.
How optimistic do you feel that we could leave here in the next few days with some sort of an agreement that you'll feel satisfied with?
I mean, we have to remind ourselves that unlike Paris, we're not going to end up with a treaty. So it is about finalizing how we would make this system work, right? A lot of the decision is going to be about all the unfinished business. At the moment, we have systems where all the countries come together and basically tell us what they have done. But it's a bit like we file tax returns, all with a different base year, different time frame, different currencies. We can't compare apples and apples. So I have confidence that the governments who are here would want to make sure the system is in play. Now, having said that, I'm cautiously optimistic only because there are many, many rocky things they have to resolve, and we have about 48 hours to get this done, or less even, to get it done.
Yeah, time really is running out, isn't it? Andy, let's come to you. You've been here for the past couple of days with that real focus on regions. What have you got from today?
So we've been here for 2 days, the Transport Day yesterday and of course the Cities Day today, so those are the right two. And what I've taken from today is Bernice is absolutely right, the real focus, particularly of the international media, is can this mega question be answered? But delivery has actually got to be done in local places, and cities and regions can really step forward to do that, whether it be over public transport, whether it can be over retrofitting homes, or indeed, as we saw yesterday when we were looking at 2 trains designed in the West Midlands, one a battery train, one a hydrogen train. Can we actually contribute technical ideas to solving this? So actually there's a lot of responsibility on us to deliver.
Well, let's pick up on that point, because we've had a question from Carly Amanda, who's in Newcastle. How do you plan to make electric vehicles financially affordable? Of course, there she's talking about cars, but in terms of trains as well, these are going to cost a lot of money, far more than the current more polluting public transport and cars that we have access to at the moment.
So I think there's a really important point here. The sort of opinion, and I hear this from people in the West Midlands all the time, is yes, we want to do our bit to this, but actually we probably can't afford many people to pay a lot more towards it. So on public transport, we're very clear. Actually, it has to be really affordable, has to be really reliable.
Who pays for that then?
Various people. In terms of the capital investment to make some of this happen, it's a mix of government, of the local transport authority, and of the private sector. And one of the things we've really seen here is that sort of triple piece coming together is very powerful. And then if you are actually looking at, if you're looking, for example, then at the fares, there is absolutely no difference on whether it's a hydrogen-driven bus, an electric-driven bus, or a conventional. So we know we've got to still deliver value for money for citizens.
Bernice, there is this fear, isn't there? I think a lot of people understand climate change, understand perhaps their fears around it, but they also have the fear life's going to become a heck of a lot more expensive if we're going to combat it.
You know, I was thinking today about how even for Copenhagen, which is the summit that we thought was a failure, countries came together and had some plans. Now, because all the countries had plans at the same time for renewable energy, for example, 5-10 years down the line now we have actually cheaper solar and wind energy than we have many fossil fuel energy. So the good news about these sort of gatherings, such as the COP, is indeed that governments come together, they all commit to the same thing. What does that mean? They send the right signals to the market, they create the markets. This means that all the things that we think currently might be too expensive with scale, given all the commitments around the world, can get cheaper. I'm therefore optimistic that with all the governments committing, many governments committing to different types of electric vehicles, different types of clean energy vehicles, for example, and among many other options, we will see much cheaper options down the line after this summit. This COP,
This, of course, has been a huge summit, this COP. People jetting in from right around the world for these talks and from the world's media as well. A question here from Joshua Brandwood in Lancaster. How can the UK government, and I guess, Bernice, from your point of view, how can all of the governments represented here be serious about climate change when they've travelled from all over the world to get here? This could have happened over Zoom, couldn't it? We're used to doing everything over Zoom at the moment.
You know, well, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that the last year have taught us that actually there are things that are not replaceable, such as interpersonal exchanges and the free song and the energy that comes from being in the same room together to force an outcome. Shame and flattery, which is quite a basic diplomatic tool, really, tend to happen better in person. At the same time, there is no question that we also need to make sure that we are not going back to our old ways and fly for no reason. I wouldn't say that coming together to find the solution to climate change is a bad reason for travel. At the same time, this is why we're here. We have to create the scale so that we can have more sustainable aviation options, sustainable transportation options, so that we wouldn't be wasting energy as we are doing this, which is a very important matter of problem solving for climate change together.
Do you think the Conservatives, the UK government, is taking this seriously? Of course, Boris Johnson criticised when, after his first visit here, he flew back.
I think there's absolutely no question that Britain has put all of its diplomatic might, and the Prime Minister's actually put some political capital on the line. And I don't mind admitting that as a Conservative and as a Brit, I'm actually proud of the role that we have played here to try to bring people together. And linking to what you asked Bernice, there is absolutely no question that this conference has brought commitments. We saw yesterday from the US and China. We've seen Australia, a country that usually we admire hugely, belatedly coming to the table with commitments. So there is absolutely no question. The event of the conference has brought things about, and Britain has been absolutely wholehearted in its determination to achieve that.
Well, let's bring in a question from Sharon, who's from Oakhampton in Devon. You talk about those commitments, but of course it's the action that's going to make a difference to the planet. A commitment doesn't necessarily mean action, does it?
But I said in my first answer that I will take away an absolute need to drive action. Our citizens require it, by the way. The consumer or the voter is going to hold people responsible for whether they deliver from this. I mean, you were asked a question about electric vehicles earlier on. Look at the consumer uptake there. Consumers are voting literally with their wallets here. They will be saying, you've said all that publicly, you have now got to deliver. And I personally think that is a good thing, because there's nothing that drives people's actions better than the consumer or the voter demanding it.
I've had someone on Twitter who clearly lives not too far away from here has suggested that this conference has made their life incredibly miserable for the past 2 weeks. It's taken over the city and they've had to stay away from it, calling it a farce. Is it a farce, or do we need to accept that sometimes these things are going to crop up in people's backyards?
We do. And actually, most Glaswegians I've spoken to over the last couple of days, which isn't a huge number, but the overwhelming statement is we have been proud to do this, and they have done it incredibly well. And we will do the same in Birmingham for the Commonwealth Games next year. It is a wonderful opportunity to promote your city to a global audience, and you cannot put a cash value on that.
Bernice, do you think global leaders really lead by example? There was a global summit in Rome, then they all flew pretty much on separate planes into Glasgow 2 weekends ago. Do you think we're seeing that sort of leadership from the people at the very top?
You know, I think that as we understand better the problem of climate change, all of us will want our own lifestyle as well as our leaders' lifestyle to conform to the standards that is demanded of it. So we're going to see many more thinking, and obviously I think abstention from more high carbon lifestyle from now on. At the same time, as we discussed earlier as well, that we are at a relatively early stage, even though we know that we're on the right trajectory and the direction is clear, we're not going fast enough. So I think that we will see many more fastening of moves towards the sort of options that you're talking about. And leadership by example would be much better enabled if we have managed the systemic change or systems shift that we have been talking about here. I mean, we are talking about transformation of economic systems so that we don't have to think about it when we are going forward, that any cars that we go into would be low or zero carbon, that any transport option is better and more sustainable. So this is actually the world that we are trying to make sure that coming out of Glasgow, we will see more of a shape of coming forward.
Well, Andy, we had a question from Joe in West Yorkshire saying, why don't our so-called leaders lead by example? How can, first of all, you as a Metro Mayor lead by example and show that you are actually serious about climate change in your personal life, if you like?
Well, this might sound a slightly indulgent response, but I will give you a straight answer to it. I don't have a car in the city. I use the public transport because I want to know that it's good enough for everybody. And that is, I think, a very good personal leadership role. And do you know what? Lots of people often say to me when I'm sitting on the train in Birmingham, didn't expect you to be using this. And I look slightly staggered. Why not? Of course, it's my job to run this. Of course I should be. So I think that's just a very small example of leadership, and I hope more people would do that.
Of course, people who live in rural areas would say, well, I'd love to get on a bus or a train and easily get around. It's not as possible. Do you think as we do move to become more green as a country, that places that you represent, more urban areas, will get the benefit of trying to combat climate change and becoming more green, and rural areas could be left further behind? Because that will be a concern.
I don't think that, actually. It's often said view. So if you just take transport, as we were talking about that, we're doing a trial in our rural areas in the West Midlands of what we call on-demand buses. So we use the sort of Uber technology in your phone to actually have a small bus that consolidates different journeys. So we're trying to find a public transport solution for rural areas as well. Interesting, the role that technology can play in that.
Well, how important, Bernice, do you think little changes are to the way we all live our lives? We're talking a lot about global, huge nations here with hugely emitting nations with big bank balances. But on a personal level, how effective can a little change be, like not using the car as much, for example?
I mean, as I said earlier, obviously we are looking at the importance of systems shift. At the same time, we also learned as well in the last couple of weeks that every little bit also counts, not least because of the kind of scrutiny that you're just telling us that everyone is going to show everybody else. Therefore, I think that as we evolve into a lower carbon lifestyle, all of these will become much more present and easier choices to be made, and some of the hard choices will have to be made as well, and at the same time every bit would count.
Well, we're talking about sort of around the world. A question that's come in from Mark in Doncaster. I think people are getting fed up, he says, with all of this, when China, India, the USA, he says, are just playing lip service. We in the UK are a small country, and he says we're being taxed heavily for the privilege. How is this fair that smaller countries might be doing a lot more than the bigger countries? Can the UK do much, really, that's going to combat global warming if America, China, for example, aren't?
Well, let me start by saying that it is not true that America and China aren't. I think that, that statement might have been true, let's say, for 4 years ago, or less than we have today because of the US government. But at the same time, we have seen that the US government is now very firmly back with big plans, big infrastructure spending bills, etc., trying to get themselves back on track. In terms of China, it is always a difficult one on the basis that it's a growing, developing economy that is still building, obviously, coal-fired power stations. At the same time, if you look at the share of coal-fired power plants in Chinese economy has gone down steadily every year, percentage by percentage. It is now home to the largest, I think, I don't know what the word is, the noun is, all the renewable energy deployed in the world, half of them are in China. Half the world's electrical vehicles in existence are in China. So I don't think it is true that these countries don't do anything. However, what is true is that every single one of them need to do more, like the UK, and that also includes the US and China. There's another way to look at it as well, is that the climate change problem isn't just about the future. It is, of course, very much about the future. It is also about the past. And if you look at the past, then the UK, having been very fortunately one of the earliest developed nations in the world, industrial nations in the world, definitely had a lot of historical legacy on that as well. So if you balance all of these things, that meant that everyone has to move, and everyone has to probably move faster anyways at the same time.
Andy, let's bring this much closer to home. It's a little while away before you have to make up your mind about, and next elections are coming up. But how important will climate change be in local politics as a voter issue, do you think?
Oh, I think the direction of travel is very, very clear on this. I had my first election 4 years ago. It hardly featured. I think we did a bit of our own research. We believed it was the third most significant issues in people's minds at the elections just gone. So there is absolutely no question. This is really shooting up the list of things that people are concerned about and want to see leadership. Now, let's be honest, I think the recovery from the pandemic, jobs is going to be the top issue for a period, but I expect this to emerge as the biggest long-term political issue.
All right, well, we will see if that happens. Thank you both very much. That is all we've got time for here in Glasgow. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for watching. Time here in Glasgow, of course, running out for that crucial agreement. Goodbye. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much.